Literally no offense to anything. They're very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
This would have been a lot better if they, had a strong male along with her, a prince, if it wasn't about socialism, if they didn't remove the dwarves, if they...
A single announcement from Disney can make headlines around the world. When the studio revealed plans to remake Snow White, many expected a fresh spin on the classic fairy tale that launched the golden age of animation back in 1937. At first glance, it seemed like a safe bet. Old fans would get a blast of nostalgia, and new viewers would experience a beloved story updated for modern tastes. Yet somewhere along the line, this adaptation took a dizzying turn. The result was a whirlwind of controversies that overshadowed almost everything else. People began calling it the Snow White disaster, a phrase that stuck thanks to swirling rumors, lukewarm test screenings, and a surprising clash of viewpoints from the cast and creative team. Talk of behind-the-scenes tension, script rewrites, and a confused story drew attention away from the timeless magic many had hoped to see. At the center stood Rachel Zegler, cast to play the iconic princess. Around her circled a storm of backlash that touched on everything from her heritage to her rumored feud with actor Peter Dinklage. The upheaval was so intense that whispers began circulating about a second Snow White adaptation, one that might feature a completely different star, someone like Jenna Ortega. How could a fairy tale remake unleash so much chaos? Was the controversy simply born out of clashing perspectives on how to modernize a cherished story? Or did one stray comment from a major star truly send Disney into panic mode? All these questions and more became intertwined, forming a tapestry of speculation unlike anything Disney had faced in years. But that's only scratching the surface of what really happened. The full picture goes deeper, involving creative disagreements, behind-the-scenes rumors, and the relentless online chatter that can make or break a film before anyone even sees it. Once the spotlight locked onto this adaptation, every new development turned into a headline, and so began what fans, critics, and industry insiders alike would eventually dub the Snow White disaster. When Disney first teased that they were remaking Snow White, reactions were mostly positive. After all, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs wasn't just a movie, it was an institution. From the start, the studio hinted that the new film would address certain outdated elements of the original 1937 classic. They promised a carefully balanced approach, retaining the timeless charm of Snow White's innocence and optimism, while weaving in modern perspectives. Longtime fans were cautiously optimistic. Many reminisced about how the original film introduced them to the wonder of Disney animation. Younger audiences, intrigued by the visuals and the possibility of fresh themes, wondered if the film would follow the path of The Jungle Book, praised for its seamless blend of live action and CGI, or falter like some other reimaginings that critics claimed lacked heart. Disney's early announcements focused on positivity and inclusivity. They teased a shift in Snow White's character, suggesting she'd be more empowered and less defined by the need for a prince's rescue. They also implied that the 7 Dwarfs might undergo a respectful update, though details were scarce. Initially, this approach appeased many who felt the original story was lovely, but needed a modern refresh. Social media buzzed with excitement as soon as rumors of potential casting emerged. People debated whether the new adaptation should lean into the musical elements or attempt something more grounded. Some wanted a complete reinvention. Others hoped the film would maintain its fairy tale purity. The stakes were high. This wasn't just another Disney remake. This was the one that started it all. But that wasn't the whole story. Somewhere between the unveiling of the project and its production, storm clouds gathered. In the weeks before, official casting announcements, speculation ran wild. Then Disney dropped a bombshell. Rachel Zegler, had been chosen to play Snow White. The news spread like wildfire, igniting a cascade of both praise and pointed questions. From the moment Rachel Zegler's casting became official, the conversation took off in every corner of the internet. Zegler, praised for her performance in West Side Story, brought a fresh face and strong vocal talents that seemed perfect for OW, a Disney musical. Proponents of her casting celebrated Disney's choice to introduce a new level of inclusivity to an almost century-old role. They felt it was time to see the princess portrayed by someone who didn't strictly align with the traditional Germanic roots of the original tale. Yet not everyone was cheering. Skeptics questioned whether Disney was making a shallow attempt at diversity that might overshadow other crucial storytelling elements. Others felt uneasy about how the updated Snow White would fit into the historical setting. Tensions rose on social media, often devolving into heated debates about tradition versus progress. Still, for a while, the conversation stayed relatively hopeful. A large portion of the fan community stood behind Zegler, applauding her for taking on such an iconic part. If she could project the same sincerity and emotional nuance she had shown in her earlier work, perhaps the new film would shine brightly. Critics acknowledged her talent, and even some skeptics softened their stances, waiting to see how she would interpret the character. Meanwhile, Disney emphasized that Zegler's role would mark a turning point. Snow White wasn't going to be a passive damsel. She would be a more decisive figure, with bigger goals and a more fleshed-out personality. All of this fed the hype. People wanted to see what Disney would do next. But in the background, a voice was about to emerge, one that would shift the entire conversation around the film. That voice belonged to Peter Dinklage. Peter Dinklage's career had long been marked by a willingness to challenge outdated stereotypes in Hollywood. When the public learned he had strong opinions on Disney's new Snow White, headlines sprang up everywhere. He expressed concerns about how the movie would handle the Seven Dwarfs, describing certain portrayals of them in older adaptations as offensive or outdated. The media latched onto his remarks, and social media erupted with discussions on representation. Countless people praised Dinklage's honesty, pointing out that stereotypical depictions of dwarfs in popular culture had persisted for decades without enough scrutiny. Others insisted that the dwarves in Snow White were harmless fantasy figures, beloved by audiences for generations. But what truly lit the fuse was the suggestion that Disney was progressive in one way by casting a Latina Snow White, yet possibly neglecting deeper representation issues by including the Seven Dwarfs without re-evaluating how they might appear or be characterized. Dinklage's outspokenness forced the studio to address whether the dwarfs would still be seven comedic sidekicks, or if they'd be depicted in a more nuanced, respectful manner. Disney responded in a cautious tone, stating they were taking a new approach to the dwarfs. Yet that answer raised more questions than it answered. Some little-person actors spoke out to say that removing the dwarfs altogether would erase opportunities for them, while others argued that continuing to portray dwarfs as magical caricatures could perpetuate stereotypes. The debate was complicated, with strong opinions across the board. And amid this storm stood Rachel Zegler, about to portray a character whose entire arc depended heavily on her relationships with these dwarfs. At least in the original story, she remained quiet publicly, prompting speculation about how she felt regarding Dinklage's critique. At the time, many assumed she was simply following studio instructions not to comment, but the silence only stoked the rumor mill. Peter Dinklage's statements had struck a nerve. Suddenly, Disney found itself dealing with more than just a casting controversy. The studio had made promises about updating the Seven Dwarfs, but it wasn't clear how those updates would look. Insiders hinted that multiple script rewrites were happening in rapid succession, as executives tried to avoid public backlash while also clinging to the timeless appeal of the original. Writers and creative team members were caught in a tug-of-war. Some believed the dwarfs' comedic presence should remain intact, but refined. Others argued that including 7 dwarfs at all, at least in their classic form, might cause offense. Another faction insisted that removing the dwarfs, or drastically altering them, would strip the story of its distinctive heart. Rumors circulated about half-finished scripts being tossed aside, with new pages arriving on set at the last minute. Rachel Zegler's involvement fueled the sense of unease. According to unverified leaks, she was suddenly faced with changing dialogue, reworked character motivations, and newly added scenes that felt jarringly different from the original plan. If she had been excited to bring Snow White to life, the swirling confusion threatened to undermine her performance. Some reports suggested that the mood on set became tense as the production team tried to navigate these changes without falling too far behind schedule. Meanwhile, people closely following the project began to see small cracks forming. They noticed the cast wasn't uniformly enthusiastic in public. Interviews grew guarded, and the Disney marketing machine seemed more cautious than usual. The entire production began to feel shaky, as if it were searching for a solid identity but couldn't find one. And in the midst of it all, a new rumor began to spread that Rachel Zegler herself was pointing fingers, suggesting Peter Dinklage's criticisms had pushed the film over the edge. The so-called blame game started quietly, a few online gossip. Sites claimed to have insider info saying Rachel Zegler was frustrated with how much the story kept changing. She was purportedly upset that Dinklage's comments, while perhaps well-intentioned, had triggered a chain reaction of studio panic, leading to script overhauls that didn't always make sense. Even more inflammatory were the rumors that she, privately, blamed him for igniting a controversy that overshadowed her big role. Some fans defended Dinklage, arguing he had every right to critique Hollywood stereotypes. Others sided with Zegler, if indeed the rumors were true, pointing out that drastic last-minute rewrites often damage a film's coherence. To them, the FIO's real culprit was a failure of leadership at Disney, not the actor who raised legitimate concerns. Yet the rumor persisted. Rachel Zegler, furious at how the dwarf's portrayal overshadowed everything else, believed Dinklage's outspokenness had sunk the project's chances. No one outside the production could confirm whether she truly felt this way. Still, people latched onto the narrative because it offered a neat explanation for the turmoil. The idea of 2 Hollywood names, Zegler, a rising star, and Dinklage, an established figure, being at odds was irresistible to gossip outlets. Headlines declared a hidden feud that many suspected was half speculation, half truth. But that wasn't the whole story. Even if Rachel Zegler privately felt exasperated, the film's problems ran deeper than one individual statement. Behind the scenes, the creative vision for this adaptation was said to be in disarray. The dwarves were just one thread in a tapestry of conflicting tones, hasty rewrites, and uncertain commitments to modern messaging. Still, the rumor that Zegler blamed Dinklage gave the public a convenient scapegoat, fueling the meltdown that was now labeled the Snow White disaster. As production trudged forward, test screenings were held to gauge audience reactions. The feedback was decidedly mixed, and at times downright negative. Viewers found the film uneven, describing it as torn between sweet nostalgia and heavy-handed attempts at being relevant. Whispers emerged that the dwarfs, if they appeared at all, were relegated to a peculiar sideline role, depicted in ways that felt neither fully classic nor convincingly updated. Early reviews from these test groups painted a troubling picture. Some complained that the story tried too hard to check boxes about empowerment and inclusivity without weaving those elements seamlessly into the fairy tale atmosphere. Others noted abrupt shifts in tone, as if the movie couldn't decide whether it was a whimsical musical or a pointed social commentary. At this point, the phrase Snow White disaster started circulating on social media, fueled by those who, had heard the test screening chatter. Once a catchy label takes hold online, it's hard to shake. Soon, every snippet of alleged behind-the-scenes drama was posted, dissected, and debated. Each new rumor about script trouble or creative clashes felt like more evidence that the adaptation was veering off course. Rachel Zegler's role grew even more complicated. She was widely seen as a talented performer, yet critics and fans alike questioned whether the final film gave her enough consistency to shine. People debated if she had been miscast or if the rewrites had undermined her best efforts. The dwarfs, once a central comedic and emotional anchor to the original story, hovered in an odd limbo, and overshadowing it all was that lingering question. Did the fiasco all trace back to Peter Dinklage's remarks, or was he just the flashpoint for Disney's deeper struggles? The negativity around the project only seemed to balloon. Online, conversations devolved into arguments over how best to adapt a classic in a more enlightened era. Disney, for its part, attempted damage control, emphasizing that the final cut would honor the spirit of Snow White. But the narrative that the film was doomed had become too strong to dispel. By the time it neared release, Snow White disaster felt almost like a foregone conclusion. As if the situation weren't chaotic enough, another rumor sprang up that Disney might be preparing a second Snow White adaptation. The premise was simple. If this version flopped or continued to draw negative attention, maybe the studio would pivot to a completely fresh take, handing the role to another rising talent. Enter Jenna Ortega, already known for her successful performances and her knack for mixing humor with depth. Fans latched onto this possibility with surprising enthusiasm. Some claimed Ortega's blend of comedic timing and emotional range could give Snow White a sharper edge, especially if the dwarfs were handled more thoughtfully from the start. Others scoffed at the idea, labeling it as pure speculation or an attempt by Disney to distance itself from the existing fiasco. Still, message boards lit up with Ortega for the Snow White hashtags, and concept art from talented fans began popping up online. This development shone a light on a bigger question. Had Disney's live-action strategy finally hit a wall? For years, the studio had been banking on big-budget remakes, leaning heavily on nostalgia. Some, like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, performed well financially, even if they drew mixed reviews. Others fizzled, but none seemed as dramatically fraught as Snow White. It was the studio's founding fairy tale, the cornerstone of Walt Disney's legacy. Fumbling this particular remake felt more consequential than messing up a lesser-known classic. Industry observers wondered if the rumored second adaptation was simply an insurance policy, a backup plan, in case the first one's reception proved catastrophic. Officially, Disney refused to confirm or deny such speculation, probably hoping the storm would subside. But the damage was done. People saw the fiasco as a cautionary tale about what can happen when a beloved property is constantly reshaped to appease every new wave of commentary or controversy. When Disney's Snow White finally reached the public, the outcome was every bit as complicated as the rumors suggested. The film landed in theaters weighed down by negativity. Critics slammed its fractured story. Fans felt the adaptation lacked the enchanting soul of the original. And the dwarfs, once a beloved element, seemed oddly out of place. Rachel Zegler's performance received a mix of praise for her talent and criticism for a final result that felt incoherent. Throughout this whirlwind, the question of Peter Dinklage's influence on the fiasco lingered. Was he the agent of much-needed change, shining a light on the dangers of perpetuating stereotypes? Or had his remarks accidentally pushed the studio into a scramble that hurt the film's flow? Rumors about Zegler blaming Dinklage continued to spread, though neither star confirmed nor denied them. In any case, the fiasco, forever labeled as the Snow White disaster, remains a potent reminder of how quickly a major production can topple when it can't reconcile creative integrity with evolving social standards. Disney, for its part, learned a hard lesson about the risks of modernizing a beloved classic without a clear, unified vision from day one. Whether the rumored second adaptation with Jenna Ortega ever takes shape remains unclear. But the fiasco left behind an important legacy. No matter how iconic a tale may be, any misstep in rewriting, casting, or messaging can be amplified 1,000-fold under the glare of the modern spotlight. In the end, the story of this Snow White wasn't just about dwarfs or about a lead actress who found herself caught in the crossfire. It was about the tightrope every major studio now walks when updating cherished stories. Balancing nostalgia with progress can be done, but it demands careful planning, consistent storytelling, and open communication with audiences, and perhaps a dash of humility in confronting the original material's cultural baggage. Without those elements, even the most iconic fairy tale can collapse into public controversy. That's the real lesson. Adaptation is a delicate art. If you move too slowly, you're called outdated. If you move too fast, you risk losing the magic that made the original special. This Snow White saga showed that there's no easy formula and that every creative decision has far-reaching consequences. In a different world, Rachel Zegler might have delivered a universally acclaimed performance, and Peter Dinklage's critique might have smoothly steered Disney toward a thoughtful portrayal. Instead, we witnessed a prime example of how things can unravel when neither tradition nor innovation is balanced with a clear direction. For now, the Snow White disaster stands as an unforgettable milestone in the history of Disney remakes. A cautionary tale for anyone daring to remake a classic. The conversation about blame, from Rachel Zegler's alleged frustrations with Dinklage to Disney's own struggle with representation, is likely to endure. Each new rumor of a do-over or a recast will revive memories of this colossal misstep. And whenever Hollywood tries to modernize another beloved story, people will remember how Snow White herself got caught in a storm of swirling controversy that few saw coming.